The snowstorm hit the Montana Territory so hard that Amelia York couldn't see her own hands stretched out before her face, and she knew with absolute certainty that she was going to die out here alone. The cold cut through her thin traveling dress like knives, and her feet had gone numb inside her soaked boots hours ago. She'd been trying to reach Victor, a small mining town her uncle had written about in his letters, but the stagecoach had overturned in the blizzard. The driver was dead, his neck broken in the fall, and the other passengers had scattered into the whiteout, their screams swallowed by the howling wind. Amelia had stumbled away from the wreckage, desperate to find shelter, but there was nothing out here except endless plains of snow and ice. Her legs gave out beneath her, and she collapsed into a snowdrift, the cold seeping into her bones. She thought of her mother back in Philadelphia, how she'd begged Amelia not to make this journey west. How right she'd been. Amelia's eyes fluttered closed, her body shaking so violently that her teeth chattered, and she began to pray. Then strong hands were lifting her, pulling her up from the snow. She tried to open her eyes, but her lashes were frozen together. A deep voice spoke close to her ear, the words muffled by the storm, and she felt herself being hoisted up and thrown over something warm and solid. A horse, she realized dimly. Someone had found her. The ride seemed to last forever and no time at all. Amelia drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of the rhythmic movement beneath her and the solid warmth of the man who held her steady with one arm. When they finally stopped, she was carried again, and then there was blessed warmth surrounding her. "Easy now," that same deep voice said, clearer this time. "You're safe. I've got you." Amelia forced her eyes open and found herself in a small cabin, lit by the orange glow of a fireplace. The man who'd saved her was crouched beside her, working to remove her frozen boots. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes the color of whiskey. His face was weathered from the sun and wind, marked by the hard life of the frontier, but there was kindness in his expression as he looked at her. "Your feet," he said quietly. "I need to warm them slowly or you'll lose your toes. This is going to hurt." He was right. As feeling returned to her extremities, the pain was excruciating. Amelia bit down on her lip to keep from crying out, tasting blood, but a whimper escaped anyway. The cowboy's jaw tightened, and he worked faster, wrapping her feet in warm towels and moving to help her out of her frozen dress. "I'm sorry," he said, not meeting her eyes. "This isn't proper, but you'll die if we don't get you warm. I'll try to preserve your modesty as best I can." Amelia was too cold and too grateful to care about propriety. She let him strip away her wet clothes down to her chemise and drawers, then wrap her in thick wool blankets. He brought her close to the fire and put a cup of hot broth in her shaking hands. "Small sips," he instructed. "Your body needs to warm up from the inside too." She did as he said, the warm liquid bringing tears to her eyes. It was the most wonderful thing she'd ever tasted. As the immediate crisis passed and her mind began to clear, Amelia finally got a proper look at her rescuer. He was tall and lean, dressed in worn denim and a flannel shirt. His hands were calloused and strong, the hands of a man who worked hard for his living. There was a gentleness to the way he moved around her that contrasted with his rugged appearance. "Thank you," Amelia managed to whisper, her voice hoarse. "You saved my life." The cowboy settled into a chair across from her, his expression serious. "I was checking on my cattle when I saw the stagecoach overturned. Found you in the snow not far from it. Are there other survivors?" Amelia shook her head, fresh grief washing over her. "The driver died in the crash. The others ran off into the storm. I don't know what happened to them." He nodded slowly, his jaw working. The storm's too bad to go looking tonight. I'll ride out at first light, see if there's anyone else out there who needs help. For now, you need to rest and get your strength back." "What's your name?" Amelia asked. "Arthur Yates," he replied. "I've got a small ranch about 5 miles from Victor. This is my line shack where I stay when I'm working the northern pastures. Not much, but it's warm and dry." "I'm Amelia York," she said. "I was traveling to Victor to stay with my uncle, Marcus York. Do you know him?" Arthur's expression shifted, something like sympathy crossing his face. "I knew Marcus. I'm real sorry to tell you this, miss, but he passed away about 2 months ago. Mine collapse." The news should have devastated her, but Amelia felt oddly numb. She'd barely known her uncle, had only decided to come west because she'd had nowhere else to go after her mother died of consumption in the spring. Now she was truly alone in the world, stranded in Montana territory with no money, no family, and no prospects. "I see," she said quietly. "Then I suppose I'll need to find work in Victor once the storm passes." Arthur studied her for a long moment, his whiskey-colored eyes thoughtful. "Get some rest first. We'll figure out what to do tomorrow." He gave her the only bed in the small cabin, insisting he'd be fine in the chair by the fire. Amelia was too exhausted to argue. She crawled under the thick quilts and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, grateful to be alive and warm. When she woke, pale winter sunlight was streaming through the cabin's single window, and the smell of coffee and frying bacon filled the air. Arthur was at the small stove cooking breakfast. He glanced over when he heard her stir. "How are you feeling?" he asked. Amelia sat up slowly, taking stock of her body. Everything ached and her feet were tender, but she was alive. "Better," she said. "Sore, but better." "Your dress is dry," he said, nodding toward where it hung by the fire. "I did my best to clean the mud off it, but I'm afraid it's pretty torn up from the crash." "Thank you," Amelia said, touched by his thoughtfulness. She waited until he politely turned his back, then quickly changed into the dress. It was indeed torn in several places, the hem shredded and one sleeve hanging by threads, but it was better than nothing. They ate breakfast together in companionable silence. Arthur had made johnnycakes to go with the bacon, and though the meal was simple, it was delicious. Amelia couldn't remember the last time she'd felt so hungry. "I need to go look for other survivors," Arthur said when they'd finished eating. "You should stay here where it's warm. There's food in the cupboard and plenty of wood for the fire. I'll be back before dark." "Be careful," Amelia said, surprised by the genuine concern she felt. This man was a stranger, yet he'd risked his own life to save hers and shown her nothing but kindness. Arthur paused at the door, his hand on the latch. He looked back at her and something passed between them, a connection that made Amelia's breath catch. Then he nodded and was gone, leaving her alone in the quiet cabin. The day passed slowly. Amelia kept the fire going and tidied the small space, feeling the need to do something useful. She discovered that Arthur kept his cabin remarkably neat for a bachelor cowboy. His few possessions were well maintained, and there were books on a small shelf by the bed, real books, their spines creased from repeated reading. She examined the titles: Shakespeare, Whitman, Hawthorne. This cowboy was educated, or at least self-taught. When Arthur returned as the sun was setting, his expression was grim. "Found 2 of the passengers," he said quietly. "Both dead, frozen. I marked the spots so folks from town can retrieve the bodies when the weather clears. I'm sorry." Amelia closed her eyes, grief for those lost souls washing over her. "They have families somewhere who love them," she whispered. "People who will never know what happened." "The sheriff will send word once we get to town," Arthur assured her. "They'll be properly buried and their families notified." That night, They talked more as they sat by the fire. Arthur told her about his life on the frontier, how he'd come west from Missouri 5 years ago with nothing but a horse and a dream of owning his own land. He'd worked as a ranch hand, saved every penny, and finally bought a small plot where he ran a modest herd of cattle. It was hard work, lonely work, but it was his. "What about you?" he asked. "What brings a Philadelphia lady all the way out to Montana Territory?" Amelia told him about her mother's death, about the debts that had consumed everything they owned, about her uncle's letters painting a picture of opportunity in the West. "I didn't have anywhere else to go," she admitted. "My mother and I weren't wealthy, but we were respectable. When she died, I discovered we were deeply in debt to our landlord. He would have seen me in debtor's prison or worse if I hadn't fled." "There's no shame in that," Arthur said gently. "You did what you had to do to survive. That takes courage." "Or desperation," Amelia said with a bitter laugh. "Sometimes they're the same thing," Arthur replied. "Out here, we don't much care about where people come from or what they left behind. It's who you are now that matters." His words comforted her in a way she hadn't expected. For the first time since her mother's death, Amelia felt a small spark of hope. They stayed in the line shack for 3 more days, waiting for the weather to clear enough for safe travel to Victor. During that time, Amelia came to know Arthur Yates as more than just her rescuer. She learned that he was thoughtful and kind, with a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. He was well-read and intelligent, hungry for conversation about books and ideas in a way that suggested he didn't often have the opportunity. Arthur, for his part, seemed equally drawn to Amelia. She caught him watching her sometimes with an expression she couldn't quite read, something tender and wondering. He was unfailingly respectful, never once making her feel uncomfortable despite their unusual circumstances, but there was a growing warmth between them that felt like the beginning of something profound. On the 4th morning, the sun rose clear and bright. The storm finally passed. Arthur saddled his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Copper, and helped Amelia up behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid strength of him, and tried to ignore the way her heart raced at the contact. The ride to Victor took most of the morning. The town was small, just a main street lined with rough wooden buildings and a scattering of houses beyond. It existed primarily to serve the nearby silver mine, and most of its residents were miners or people who made their living off the miners. Arthur took Amelia straight to the boarding house run by a woman named Mrs. Patricia Hendricks, a no-nonsense widow in her 50s who took one look at Amelia's bedraggled appearance and immediately ushered her inside. "Poor dear," Mrs. Hendricks clucked, shooting Arthur an approving look. "Arthur Yates, you did right bringing her here. I'll get her fed and settled. You go make your report to Sheriff Dalton about that stagecoach." Arthur hesitated, looking at Amelia. "Will you be all right?" "I'll be fine," Amelia assured him, though the thought of him leaving made her chest tighten with unexpected anxiety. "Thank you for everything, Arthur, truly. I owe you my life." He shook his head. "You don't owe me anything. I just did what anyone would do." "That's not true," Amelia said softly. "Most men wouldn't have gone out in that storm. Most men wouldn't have cared." Arthur's ears turned slightly red and he ducked his head, suddenly looking years younger. "I'm glad I found you," he said, his voice low. "I'm grateful that you're safe." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning. Mrs. Hendricks cleared her throat pointedly, and Arthur jumped, seeming to remember where he was. He touched his hat in farewell and left, the door closing behind him with a soft click. Mrs. Hendricks studied Amelia with sharp, knowing eyes. "That man's smitten," she declared. "Never seen Arthur Yates look at anyone the way he was looking at you." "We only just met," Amelia protested weakly. Sometimes that's all it takes, Mrs. Hendricks said with a smile. Now come on, let's get you into a hot bath and some proper clothes. We'll worry about everything else after. True to her word, Mrs. Hendricks provided Amelia with a bath, a borrowed dress that was only slightly too large, and a hearty meal. As they ate, the older woman filled Amelia in on the situation. Your Uncle Marcus was a good man, she said. Died doing what he loved, working the mine. He didn't have much, but his claim is technically yours now if you want to file for it. Won't do you much good unless you can work it yourself or sell it, though. I need to find work, Amelia said. I have no money and no way to pay for room and board. Mrs. Hendricks tapped her fingers on the table thoughtfully. I could use help around here, she said. I run this boarding house alone since my husband passed, and I'm not getting any younger. Room and board plus a small wage in exchange for cooking, cleaning, and helping with the guests. Nothing glamorous, but it's honest work. Relief flooded through Amelia. I'll take it, she said immediately. Thank you, Mrs. Hendricks. You don't know what this means to me. Call me Patricia, the older woman said with a warm smile, and I think I do know. I came west myself 30 years ago with nothing but hope and determination. We women have to look out for each other out here. Amelia settled into life in Victor with surprising ease. The work at the boarding house was hard but satisfying. She cooked meals for the residents, changed linens, kept the common areas clean, and helped Patricia with the endless tasks required to keep the establishment running. The wages were modest, but her room was comfortable and the food was good. And for the first time in months, Amelia felt a measure of security. Arthur came to town every Saturday to buy supplies and check on his post at the general store. He always made a point to stop by the boarding house, ostensibly to say hello to Patricia, but his eyes sought out Amelia immediately. They fell into a pattern of conversation, standing on the front porch or sitting in the parlor under Patricia's approving gaze, talking about everything and nothing. I was thinking about that book you mentioned, Arthur said one Saturday afternoon in early February, about 3 weeks after he'd rescued her. The Hawthorne one, The Scarlet Letter. You said you thought Hester was the strongest character, but I always thought Dimsdale's struggle was more compelling. Amelia smiled, delighted that he'd been thinking about their previous conversation. Dimsdale is a coward, she argued gently. He let Hester bear the punishment alone while he hid his sin and was praised as righteous. Hester faced her shame with dignity and made a life for herself and her daughter despite everything. But that's what makes his struggle interesting, Arthur countered. He wants to confess, but can't find the courage. He's tormented by his weakness. Hester is strong from the beginning, but Dimsdale has to learn strength, and it destroys him in the process. They could have been discussing the weather for all the passion in their voices, but there was an intimacy to the conversation that made Patricia smile knowingly from where she sat mending in the corner. These two were falling in love through literature and ideas, and it was beautiful to watch. As winter slowly gave way to early spring, Arthur's visits became more frequent. He started coming to town on Wednesdays as well as Saturdays, often bringing small gifts, a handful of wildflowers, a book he'd ordered special from Denver, a pretty stone he'd found that reminded him of her eyes. Amelia treasured each offering, keeping them in her room like precious jewels. One mild evening in March, Arthur arrived with a determined look on his face. He found Amelia in the kitchen, helping Patricia prepare dinner for the boarders. Miss York, he said formally, and something in his tone made both women look up. Might I have a word with you? In private. Patricia made a shooing motion with her dish towel. Go on, she said to Amelia. I can finish up here. Amelia dried her hands on her apron, her heart suddenly pounding. She followed Arthur out to the front porch where the evening air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of pine and distant snow from the mountains. Arthur seemed nervous, which was unlike him. He paced the length of the porch twice before finally stopping in front of her, his hands clasped behind his back. "Amelia," he started, then paused. "May I call you Amelia?" "Of course," she said softly. "I wish you had been calling me that all along." He smiled briefly, then turned serious again. "I'm not a rich man," he said. "My ranch is small and the work is hard. I don't have much to offer beyond a roof over your head and a promise that you'd never want for anything I could provide. But I'm a good man, Amelia. I'm honest and I work hard, and I swear I would spend every day trying to make you happy." Amelia's breath caught. "Arthur, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that I fell in love with you the moment I saw you in that snowstorm," Arthur said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm saying that every day since has only made me more certain that you're the woman I want to spend my life with. I know it's too soon, and you probably think I'm crazy, but out here we don't waste time on long courtships when we know what we want. I want you, Amelia York. I want to marry you and build a life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. I want children with your smile and our stubbornness. I want everything with you." Tears spilled down Amelia's cheeks, but she was smiling. "I'm grateful," she whispered, the words thick with emotion. "I'm so grateful that you found me, Arthur, that you saved me and gave me a chance at this life." Arthur stepped closer, cupping her face in his calloused hands and wiping away her tears with his thumbs. "I'm the lucky one," he said fervently. "I'm the lucky one, Amelia. I spent 5 years alone on that ranch thinking that was all I deserved, all I could hope for. Then that storm came and brought you to me, and now I can't imagine going back to that loneliness. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me." "Yes," Amelia said, her voice breaking. "Yes, I'll marry you, Arthur Yates. I love you. I think I started loving you when you wrapped my frozen feet in those towels and apologized for the pain, like it was your fault instead of you saving my life." Arthur laughed, a sound of pure joy, and pulled her into his arms. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and Amelia felt like she was finally home. After so much loss and fear and uncertainty, she had found her place in the world, and it was right here in this cowboy's embrace. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Victor. Patricia stood as Amelia's witness, beaming with pride like a mother watching her daughter wed. The sheriff, Tom Dalton, stood up for Arthur, and most of the town turned out to watch. It seemed Arthur was well liked and respected, and people were happy to see him finding companionship after so many years alone. Amelia wore a dress that Patricia had helped her sew from pale blue calico, and Arthur wore his Sunday best, his hair slicked back and his face freshly shaven. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife and Arthur kissed her in front of the whole town, Amelia felt tears of happiness streaming down her face. They spent their wedding night at the boarding house in Amelia's small room, which Patricia had decorated with wildflowers and candles. Arthur was gentle with her, patient and tender, showing her with his body what his words had already told her, that she was precious to him, cherished, loved beyond measure. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Arthur's fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "Tell me about the ranch," Amelia said softly. "Our ranch, our home." Arthur smiled against her hair. "It's not much yet," he warned. "Just a small cabin, smaller than the line shack where I found you, but the land is good with a creek running through it and plenty of grass for the cattle. I've been thinking about building a bigger house, something with a real kitchen and maybe a separate bedroom for when we have children. There's a spot on a little rise that overlooks the valley that would be perfect for it." "It sounds wonderful," Amelia said dreamily. "When can we go there?" "Tomorrow," Arthur replied. "I want to take you home, Amelia Yates. I want to start our life together." The name sent a thrill through her. Amelia Yates. She was no longer alone in the world. She had a husband, a home, a future stretching out before her full of possibility. They moved to the ranch the next day. Arthur had been right that it was small. The cabin was a single room with a stone fireplace, a rope bed in one corner, and a table with 2 chairs. But it was clean and sturdy, built with Arthur's own hands, and Amelia loved it immediately. "We'll build that bigger house," Arthur promised, watching her explore the small space. "I've been saving money, and with both of us working, we can probably start construction by fall." "This is perfect for now," Amelia assured him, meaning it. After losing everything, she'd learned that home wasn't about size or grandeur. It was about love and safety and belonging, and this little cabin had all of that. The work of ranching was harder than anything Amelia had ever done. She learned to milk the cow Arthur kept for fresh dairy, to tend the kitchen garden, to preserve food for the winter. She helped with the cattle when Arthur needed an extra pair of hands, learning to ride astride instead of side saddle, because it was more practical. Her hands, which had once been soft and pale, became calloused and tanned. Her body grew strong from the constant physical labor, but she was happy. Deliriously, completely happy in a way she'd never imagined possible. Arthur was everything he'd promised and more. He was a devoted husband, always considerate of her needs, quick to help with household tasks when his ranch work was done. He still brought her flowers and pretty stones, still discussed books with her by the fire at night. He made her laugh daily and held her tenderly every night, and Amelia fell more deeply in love with him with each passing day. That first spring and summer passed in a blur of hard work and simple pleasures. They made the trip to Victor every few weeks for supplies, and to visit Patricia, who loved hearing about their life on the ranch. The older woman had become like a mother to Amelia, and Arthur treated her with the respect and affection of a dutiful son. In late August, Amelia realized she'd missed her monthly courses twice. She said nothing to Arthur at first, afraid to hope, but when the 3rd month passed and she began to feel queasy in the mornings, she could no longer deny what was happening. She told him one evening after supper as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. "Arthur, I'm going to have a baby." He went absolutely still, his coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips. Then he set the cup down very carefully, turned to her, and gathered her into his arms, burying his face in her neck. "A baby," he whispered, his voice thick. "Amelia, we're going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, even though she could feel his smile against her skin. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Arthur said. He pulled back to look at her, his whiskey-colored eyes bright with tears. "You've given me everything, Amelia. Everything I never knew I wanted. I love you so much." "I love you too," she said, kissing him softly. "I love you, and I love this life we're building together." The baby news spurred Arthur to action on the house he'd been planning. He worked with a fierce determination, spending every spare moment clearing the site and laying the foundation. He hired 2 men from Victor to help with the heavy work, and slowly, steadily, a real house began to take shape on the little rise overlooking the valley. It was a modest structure by the standards Amelia had known in Philadelphia, but to her, it was a palace. 2 bedrooms, a proper kitchen with a cast iron stove, a sitting room with large windows that let in the Montana sunshine. Arthur even built a small covered porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch their land stretch out before them. They moved into the new house in November, a month before the baby was due. Amelia was huge with child by then, her belly round and tight, but she insisted on helping unpack their belongings and arrange their furniture. Arthur fussed over her constantly, worried she would overexert herself, but Amelia was determined to make their new house a home. On a bitterly cold night in mid-December, Amelia went into labor. Arthur rode through the darkness to fetch the midwife from Victor, pushing Copper harder than he ever had, terrified something would go wrong. Patricia came too, refusing to let Amelia go through this without another woman's support. The labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours. Arthur paced outside the bedroom door, driven half mad by the sounds of Amelia's pain. When he couldn't stand it anymore, he burst into the room despite the midwife's protests and took Amelia's hand. "I'm here," he said fiercely. "I'm right here, Amelia. You can do this. You're the strongest person I know." Amelia gripped his hand so hard she left bruises, but Arthur never flinched. He stayed with her through every contraction, whispering encouragement and love, until finally, as dawn was breaking on December 18th, 1878, their son came into the world with a furious cry. The midwife cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a blanket, then placed him in Amelia's arms. Arthur sat on the edge of the bed, one arm around his wife, staring down at the tiny red face of his child with awe. "He's perfect," Amelia whispered, exhausted but radiant. "Arthur, he's absolutely perfect." "He looks like you," Arthur said, touching the baby's impossibly small hand with one finger. The infant's fingers wrapped around his, and Arthur felt his heart expand so much it hurt. "What should we name him?" They discussed names throughout the pregnancy but never settled on anything. Now, looking at her son, Amelia knew exactly what felt right. "James," she said. "James Henry Yates, after both our fathers." Arthur nodded, his eyes suspiciously bright. "James Henry Yates," he repeated. "Welcome to the world, son." The first year of James's life was both the hardest and the best of Amelia's life. The baby was colicky and demanding, sleeping only in short bursts and crying for what seemed like hours on end. Amelia was exhausted constantly, her body recovering from childbirth while dealing with the demands of an infant and the endless work of the ranch. But Arthur was an involved father in a way that surprised even him. He walked the floor with James at night when the baby wouldn't settle, changed diapers without complaint, and sang lullabies in his rough baritone that somehow soothed the baby when nothing else would. He still managed the ranch, still provided for his family, but his priorities had shifted. His wife and son came first, always. Patricia visited often that first year, bringing food and advice and giving Amelia much-needed breaks to rest. The older woman doted on James, who she declared was the most handsome baby ever born. She'd closed the boarding house and moved out to a small house in Victor, ready to enjoy her later years without the burden of constant work. "You two did good," Patricia told Arthur and Amelia one sunny afternoon in June when James was 6 months old. They were sitting on the porch while the baby napped inside, enjoying the warm weather and each other's company. "I've known a lot of couples in my time, but I've rarely seen two people more suited to each other or more in love. We got lucky," Amelia said, reaching for Arthur's hand. "It's not luck," Patricia disagreed. "It's work and commitment and choosing each other every single day. That's what makes a marriage last." Arthur squeezed Amelia's hand. "She's right," he said. "Loving you is the easiest thing I've ever done, but being a good husband takes effort. You deserve my best every day, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to give it to you." "You already do," Amelia said softly, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Every single day, Arthur Yates, you give me your best. You give me everything." The years passed peacefully. James grew from a fussy infant into a curious toddler, and then a bright, energetic boy who loved following his father around the ranch. When he was 3, Amelia became pregnant again, and this time she gave birth to twin girls they named Sarah and Grace. The births were easier than James's had been, and the girls were calmer babies, though having 2 infants at once presented its own challenges. Arthur built an addition onto the house to accommodate their growing family, adding 2 more bedrooms and expanding the kitchen. The ranch grew more prosperous as well. Arthur's careful management and hard work paid off, and they were able to increase their herd and hire a hand to help with the work. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Amelia homeschooled the children, teaching them to read and write and do figures, while Arthur taught them about the land and the animals and the value of honest work. They went to church in Victor most Sundays, where they'd become pillars of the small community. Amelia helped organize socials and charity drives, while Arthur served on the town council and volunteered with the volunteer fire brigade. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Arthur took Amelia back to the line shack where he'd first brought her that snowy night. They left the children with Patricia for the weekend and rode out together, nostalgia washing over them as they approached the small cabin. "It looks the same," Amelia marveled, dismounting from her horse. She'd become an excellent rider over the years, as comfortable in the saddle as any cowgirl. "I keep it maintained," Arthur said. "Still use it sometimes when I'm working the northern pastures, but I haven't been inside since that winter." They went in together, and Amelia was transported back to that terrifying, wonderful time when Arthur Yates was a stranger who'd saved her life. The bed was still there, covered by the same quilts. The chair where Arthur had slept still sat by the fireplace. Even the books on the shelf were the same ones. "I was so scared," Amelia said quietly, running her hand over the rough wooden table. "Not just of the cold and dying, but of what would happen to me if I survived. I had nothing, Arthur. No family, no money, no prospects. I thought I'd end up working in a saloon or worse." Arthur came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. "Instead you got a hardscrabble rancher with calloused hands and big dreams," he said. Amelia turned in his arms to face him. "I got everything," she corrected. "I got a man who loves me, who respects me, who treats me like an equal partner. I got beautiful children and a home I love and work that matters. I got a life beyond my wildest dreams, Arthur. All because you rode out into that storm." "I'm grateful," Arthur said, echoing the words she'd spoken to him that first night. "Every single day, Amelia, I'm grateful that storm brought you to me." "And I'm still the lucky one," Amelia replied, reaching up to cup his face. "I will always be the lucky one." They made love in the small cabin, slow and tender, rediscovering each other in the place where their story began. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, talking and laughing like they had in those early days, marveling at how far they'd come and how much they still loved each other. When James was 12 and the twins were 9, the children started attending the new school that had been built in Victor. The town had grown considerably over the years as the mine expanded and more families moved to the area. There was talk of Montana becoming a state soon rather than just a territory, and Victor was positioning itself to be an important regional center. With the children in school and the ranch running smoothly, Amelia found herself with time for pursuits beyond household management. She started a lending library out of her home, sharing her beloved books with anyone who wanted to read them. She taught adult literacy classes in the evenings for ranch hands and miners who'd never learned their letters. She became known throughout the county as an educated woman, willing to help anyone who wanted to improve themselves. Arthur was proud of her work and supported it fully. He'd never tried to keep Amelia confined to traditional women's roles, recognizing that her intelligence and education were gifts that deserved to be shared. If anything, he encouraged her to do more, to dream bigger. "You could teach at the school," he suggested one evening. "God knows they need qualified teachers, and you're better educated than most of the folks around here." Amelia considered it. "The children need me at home," she said slowly. "The children are growing up," Arthur countered gently. "James is nearly a man, and the girls are becoming quite independent. You have a lot of years ahead of you, Amelia. You should spend them doing something that fulfills you." So Amelia took a position teaching at the Victor School 3 days a week, and she loved it. She challenged her students to think critically, to question and explore and learn. Some of the more conservative parents grumbled about her methods, but the results spoke for themselves. Her students consistently performed well, and many went on to pursue higher education or successful careers. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. They weathered hard winters and drought summers. They celebrated births and mourned deaths. They watched their children grow into capable, caring adults who made them proud. James, serious and hardworking like his father, took over more and more of the ranch operations as Arthur entered his 50s. He married a sweet girl from Victor named Clara Morrison, and they built a house on the far end of the Yates property, staying close to family while establishing their own household. Sarah, bold and adventurous, shocked everyone by announcing she wanted to go to college in Denver to study medicine. Arthur and Amelia supported her decision despite the raised eyebrows of their neighbors, and Sarah became one of the first female doctors in Montana when she completed her training. Grace, gentler and more artistic than her siblings, married a newspaperman and moved to Helena, where she wrote poetry and essays that were published in literary journals throughout the West. Her work often celebrated the strength and resilience of frontier women, drawing heavily on her mother's experiences. Through it all, Arthur and Amelia remained each other's greatest love and strongest support. They still sat on their porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains. They still discussed books and ideas deep into the night. They still reached for each other in the darkness, their physical passion barely dimmed by age. On the 20th anniversary of the day they met, a cold December evening in 1897, Arthur took Amelia's hand as they sat by the fire. "20 years," he said wonderingly. "20 years since I found you in that snow." "The best 20 years of my life," Amelia replied, squeezing his fingers. Her hair was streaked with silver now, and there were lines around her eyes, but to Arthur she was as beautiful as the day he'd first seen her. "Mine too," Arthur agreed. "Sometimes I think about how differently things could have gone. If I'd decided not to check the cattle that day, if I'd gone a different direction, if I hadn't seen the overturned stagecoach. But you did," Amelia said firmly. "You made the choice to go out in that storm, to look for survivors, to bring me to safety. And I made the choice to trust you, to stay in Victor, to marry you. We made all the right choices, Arthur." "We did," he agreed, pulling her close. "We really did." Montana achieved statehood in 1889, and Victor continued to grow and prosper. The Yates Ranch became known throughout the region as one of the best-run operations, producing quality cattle and offering fair wages to their workers. Arthur served as mayor of Victor for 2 terms, using his position to advocate for education and infrastructure improvements. Amelia was appointed to the school board and helped establish a public library in town, finally realizing her dream of making books accessible to everyone. They became grandparents 4 times over as James and Clara had 3 children. And Sarah, despite her demanding medical practice, found time to marry a fellow doctor and have a daughter. Grace and her husband remained childless by choice, focusing instead on their creative and journalistic pursuits, but they were devoted aunt and uncle to their nieces and nephews. Patricia lived to the remarkable age of 83, passing peacefully in her sleep in 1903. Her death hit both Arthur and Amelia hard, as she'd been a constant presence in their lives and a surrogate mother to Amelia. They buried her in the Victor Cemetery with a headstone that read, "Beloved friend and mother of the heart." And hardly a week went by that Amelia didn't visit her grave to share news and seek advice from beyond the veil. As the new century dawned, bringing with it automobiles and telephones and electric lights, Arthur and Amelia found themselves in the strange position of being among the old-timers, the pioneers who'd built the West with their own hands. Young people sought them out to hear stories of the early days, and Amelia began writing down her experiences, creating a memoir she hoped would preserve the history of their time and place. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1918, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a huge celebration. At 70 years old, Arthur's dark hair had gone completely silver, and his weathered face was deeply lined, but his whiskey-colored eyes still sparkled with intelligence and humor. Amelia, at 64, moved a bit slower than she once had, but her mind was sharp as ever and her smile could still light up a room. James gave a speech praising his parents' enduring love and partnership. Sarah read a poem Grace had written for the occasion, a beautiful tribute to the romance that had survived 4 decades. The grandchildren, ranging in age from 22 to just 3 years old, presented handmade gifts and cards. When it was over and everyone had finally gone to bed, Arthur and Amelia sat alone on their porch, wrapped in blankets against the chill of the March evening. 40 years, Amelia said softly. How did we get so lucky, Arthur? Arthur chuckled. I remember having this exact conversation 20 years ago, he said. My answer hasn't changed. You were the lucky one, I'm the grateful one, and we both did the work to make this marriage everything it could be. You're mixing up our words, Amelia said with a laugh. I was the grateful one. You insisted you were lucky. After 40 years, I think we can share the credit, Arthur replied, kissing her temple. We were both lucky, we're both grateful, and we both loved each other enough to build something beautiful together. I'd do it all over again, Amelia said. Every hardship, every struggle, every moment of fear and uncertainty. I'd do it all again to end up right here with you. Me too, Arthur agreed. 1,000 times over, Amelia. You're still the best thing that ever happened to me. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the house, their grandchildren were sleeping. Their children were settled in the guest rooms and the bunkhouse. The ranch stretched out around them, productive and prosperous, a legacy they would pass on to future generations. Tell me the story again, Amelia said suddenly. Tell me about the day you found me. Arthur smiled. It was a story he'd told countless times over the years, but he never tired of it. It was the worst storm I'd ever seen, he began, his voice taking on the cadence of a practiced storyteller. The snow was coming down so thick, I could barely see Copper's ears in front of me. I almost turned back a dozen times, but something kept pushing me forward. And then I saw the stagecoach, overturned in the snow, and I knew people were in trouble. You could have died looking for survivors, Amelia interjected, as she always did. But I didn't, Arthur continued. I found you half buried in a snowdrift, frozen nearly solid, and somehow I got you onto Copper and back to the line shack. When I finally got you warm enough to open your eyes, I thought you were the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I was half dead and covered in frost, Amelia protested laughingly. You were beautiful, Arthur insisted. You looked at me with those big blue eyes and you whispered thank you, and I knew. Right then, Amelia, I knew you were going to change my life. I whispered I'm grateful, Amelia corrected gently. You did, Arthur agreed. And I told you I was the lucky one, and we've been arguing about who got the better end of that deal ever since. They laughed together, the sound carrying across the quiet ranch. Inside the house, the fire burned low, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and joys as every day did. But tonight was perfect, a moment suspended in time where two people who'd spent 40 years loving each other could simply be together, grateful for the storm that had brought them together and the choices that had kept them that way. Arthur and Amelia lived another 10 years together, 10 precious years filled with more grandchildren, watching Montana and the West continue to change and modernize, and the deep contentment that comes from a life well lived. Arthur passed first in 1928, dying peacefully in his sleep at the age of 80 with Amelia beside him. His last words to her were, "I'm still the lucky one," and Amelia held his hand and whispered back, "I'm still grateful." Amelia followed him 3 years later at the age of 79. Surrounded by her children and grandchildren in the house Arthur had built for her so many years before. As she drifted away, her last conscious thought was of that snowy night when a cowboy had pulled her from certain death and changed the course of her entire life. She whispered his name once, softly, and then she was gone, reunited with her greatest love. They were buried side by side in the Victor Cemetery, their headstone reading Arthur and Amelia Yates, partners in life and love. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through generations, and the story of how they met became a cherished family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren who grew up on the same land their ancestors had worked. The little line shack where Arthur had first sheltered Amelia remained standing, preserved as a monument to their love story. It became a place of pilgrimage for the family, where couples went to remember that love can bloom in the most unexpected circumstances, that a single choice made in kindness can echo through generations, and that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the simplest act of compassion. The books Arthur and Amelia had read together were donated to the Victor Library that Amelia had helped establish, where they remain to this day, their pages worn from use, but their words eternal. The house they built together stood for over a century, sheltering 5 generations of Yates descendants before finally being replaced with a modern structure. But the foundation stones Arthur laid remain, a lasting testament to the man who built not just a house, but a home filled with love. In the end, their story was one of hope and resilience, of two people who found each other against all odds and built a life that mattered. It was a reminder that love doesn't always arrive in grand gestures and sweeping romance, but sometimes in the quiet heroism of a man riding into a storm to help strangers, and a woman brave enough to start over in a new land. It was proof that the best love stories aren't about perfection, but about two imperfect people choosing each other every single day, through hardship and joy, until death finally parts them. And perhaps most importantly, it was a story about gratitude and luck, about recognizing the precious gift of love when it arrives and cherishing it with everything you have. Arthur insisted he was the lucky one. Amelia maintained she was grateful, but the truth was simpler and more profound. They were both blessed beyond measure to have found each other, and they knew it. That knowledge, that constant awareness of how fortunate they were, sustained them through 4 decades of marriage and created a legacy that lived on long after they were gone. Their great-great-grandchildren still live on Yates land in Montana, still tell the story of Arthur and Amelia, still believe in the kind of love that transforms lives and echoes through generations. And on cold winter nights when the snow falls thick and the wind howls through the mountains, people in Victor still remember the cowboy who rode into a storm and found not just a woman to save, but a love that would define the rest of his life. They remember Amelia, who came west with nothing and built everything, who turned gratitude into a lifetime of devotion and partnership. They remember a love story that began with a whispered thank you and lasted until death and beyond. A love story that proved the very best things in life often come from the unlikeliest circumstances, and that sometimes being saved is really about saving each other. The legacy of Arthur and Amelia Yates lives on not just in their descendants, but in the values they embodied and passed down. Kindness to strangers, courage in the face of hardship, commitment to community, and above all, the transformative power of love freely given and gratefully received. Their story became woven into the fabric of Victor, Montana, a testament to the pioneering spirit that built the West and the enduring truth that the greatest adventures are the ones we share with the people we love. In a time and place known for its harshness and danger, they created something beautiful and lasting, proving that even in the wild frontier, love could not only survive but flourish, growing stronger with each passing year until it became the stuff of legend, a story told and retold, beloved by all who heard it, a reminder that the best fairy tales are the ones that actually come true.